Welcome back to another installment of making an Appalachian mountain dulcimer. When we last checked in, I was in the process of sanding the insides of the instrument to their final thickness. Now, sanding may not be the most captivating aspect to showcase in a video. It's kind of like once you've seen one grit, you've seen them all. Having worked up to 220 grit on the interior, I've decided to call it a day on the sanding front, at least for now. I may revisit it later with some steel wool, but for the moment, it's time to step away from the sandpaper and dive into a more engaging phase, bending the sides of the dulcimer. So let's get started. Let me walk you through the setup I have going on. This is a spindle sander, which is a really handy tool that I've repurposed into a thickness sander. The theory behind this setup is this. The spindle is circular and makes contact with the wood only when it's closest to this guide, a piece of scrap 2x4. Assuming the 2x4 is flat, running the sides through the sander ensures an even thickness along their entire length. The alligator clamp comes into play to prevent the wood from bending backwards towards the spindle, just a precaution to keep things in check. Surprisingly, some of the wood tends to curve after it comes out, and this clamp helps maintain a straight course. I find this method is safer and yields a smoother finish compared to using a saw. I'm going to make a couple of backup pieces just in case anything goes wrong and I need to make another side. This wood is all cypress from the same log that the rest of the dulcimer has been made from, and I believe this is an 80 grit sleeve in case anyone is wondering. I have a piece of wood that I've already sanded to the right thickness through trial and error, and that's what I'm going to use to set up my fence for the final thickness. This piece is small enough that I can measure it with a caliper, and I know that it's 1/10 of an inch. On the dulcimer's top, thickness is important for resonance and sound quality. Here on the sides, it's just so I can bend the wood without breaking it. I'm going to finish sand the wood up to 220. After going through the sander, I found that the sides are fairly smooth, but even if they weren't, I would just run them through the sander again, maybe going a little bit quicker. I'm using a piece of scrap plywood that I know is flat. Once I'm finished, I'll clean everything up with some steel wool. With the sides now smooth, it's time to shape them, and here's where the bending process comes in. It's kind of like steam bending, except I'm opting for a heat blanket instead of a steam box. I've made this form from MDF, so I don't want to get it wet because it could swell or deform. However, I need the foil on the form to be smooth, or it could leave a crease in the wood. To prepare the wood for bending, I'll give it a good mist with a spray bottle. I suppose soaking the wood overnight is also an option, but that's really all it needs. I had some trouble getting the blanket to stay in position, and also I learned to do that before turning it on, because it heats up quickly. This setup is what I came up with in the end. The research I have done says that wood will bend at 200 degrees, which is just below boiling. The thermostat on this blanket is Celsius, so I have it set to 100, and I'm going to let this go for about 15 minutes. The wood still has a little spring to it, and it isn't quite the shape that I wanted it to be. In further experiments, I found that the wood will hold its shape better when the dial is set to 150 or 300 degrees Fahrenheit, and it won't scorch the wood. Now that the sides are bent, it's time to get them glued down. This mold is the negative of the mold I used to bend the sides, but I glued on some real wood for strength. If you'll notice, the mold is a little shorter than the sides, which will be important later. The sides are going to be glued to the end blocks. To make these, I've opted for red cedar to complement the stripe on the back of the dulcimer. I have a chunk of log that I'm about to square up on the bandsaw. I'm going to trace a pattern specifically for this instrument to make sure I get a good fit for the end blocks. This is going to add some rigidity and hopefully a touch of aesthetic cohesion to the instrument. You can see that the bandsaw gets the wood flat, but it isn't really smooth. That's why I didn't cut the sides on the bandsaw, because I would have had to sand them again anyway. I had to attach some blocks to the end of my mold to make sure the clamps held everything in place while the glue dries. I suppose that shows the importance of doing a dry test fit before putting glue on anything. And speaking of glue, I need to wipe off the squeeze out before it dries, or it will be a problem later on. And that concludes this week's update. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for more developments in the next episode.